Hi, BookTube, and welcome to another Middlemarch meditation. Last week, we left Dorothea in an emotionally overwhelmed state, and also this strangely unhinged state of mind, which we know has to do with her being denied emotional and physical intimacy in her marriage. And of course, Dorothea blames herself for all this right now, and she's determined to make her feelings submit to the discipline of duty. Let's see how that goes. And we will revert back to the way that we've done Middlemarch meditations in the recent past, where I have read through the entire chapter, but with one exception. We're going to start by discussing the epigraph separately. Part of the reason for that, this person here does not know how to read Old English correctly. And so the epigraph quotes from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, in particular from the Physician's Tale. And so rather than read it in the Old English, because I haven't prepared, and that would actually take quite a bit of learning unless I could find a recording reading that exact quotation, and then I could just copy the pronunciation, but I couldn't find anything. So we're going to read an up-to-date English translation of the epigraph, and then talk about it, and then we'll get into the reading. I hope that makes sense. So I will be reading from lines 48 to 52 of the Physician's Tale, translated into modern English, and it reads, "She was always discreet in conversation, though she was wise as Pallas, I dare say. Her manner of speaking was also very womanly and plain. No pretentious terms had she, to seem wise, but in accordance with her rank in life." What we see is very clearly described a woman whose behavior by the standards of society was perfect, it seems. And the Physician's Tale is interesting because it's kind of a reversed version of the story of Cupid and Psyche, which we heard mentioned in the previous chapter. Let's talk about this. You'll remember that Psyche was reputed to be the perfect woman, utterly beautiful. Now, there is a young woman in the Physician's Tale by Chaucer, who's also perfect in body, although that's not dwelt on a great deal. This is a very different piece of writing. But what's more important is that she's also perfect in mind and in soul. Her name, appropriately, is Virginia. She's 14 years old when the story begins. She accompanies her mother to the city. They visit the temple regularly. As it happens, when they visit today, they are seen from a distance by a judge who is also governor of the city. And the moment he sees this beautiful young woman, Virginia, he's determined to have her for himself, and he doesn't care what he has to do to make that happen. And so he sets up a deception. He pays a local man named Claudius to make an appearance in court a few days later and raise false accusations against the girl's father, who is a knight named Virginius. There we go. Not a lot of imagination in the naming of characters, but since this is probably meant to be a lesson, a moral lesson, it's important that the characters are named correctly, and imaginative names don't really come into it. So, back to the story. Claudius is paid to tell the court that Virginius doesn't actually have a daughter, that that's all a lie and a deception, that in fact, this girl called Virginia was a very young slave in Claudius' house, and Virginius stole that slave and then is trying to pass it off as being his daughter. And so what Claudius is saying is, give me my slave back. That's what I'm owed. So Virginius is summoned to court, and of course he appears. He's a good man, and he's given this judgment. And the judge will not listen to reason. Of course he won't. He's hoping that by this, once the girl is given back to Claudius, Claudius will hand that girl over to him. That's the chain of events that he's hoping for. So Virginius, feeling that he cannot fight against the law, goes back to his home, calls his daughter to him, and says to her, here's the verdict. I'll explain everything that's happened. And really, this leaves us with two options. Either she can become a slave of Claudius, and of course, without it having to be spelled out, becoming a slave of Claudius most probably means that Claudius will be able to have sex with her whenever he wants, or command her to have sex with any of the guests that come to his house. It's a horrible situation. So Virginia can either obey the verdict and do this, or she will have to die. And she's a little shocked to hear the news at first, and she asks for some time. She asks for overnight to think about it. And overnight, she turns everything over in her mind. She prays. And when she's awake in the morning, she goes directly to her father and says, "It's fine. I'm determined to choose to die. Please go ahead and kill me." And her father does. He beheads her, and he takes her head back into court to show the judge. And as is true in all good moral tales, everything breaks down from there. Of course, the judge realizes what has happened as a result of what he's done. He is struck almost senseless. Claudius realizes the implications now of everything that he's done, and the sin that now effectively sits on him. So he confesses everything to the general public. He says, "Look, this is what I was paid to do, and I'm sorry for it, and I'm prepared to die for it." And the whole crowd who have come into the court to observe the case, they turn against the judge and against Claudius. I think they spare Claudius because he seems repentant, but for the judge, they show absolutely no mercy. And I believe he is killed on the funeral pyre that had been set aside for Virginia in case she refused, or Virginius, her father, in case he refused to let the penalty be carried out. Without giving away any spoilers, I can see this may be a foreshadowing of what is to come in Middlemarch, and I only know bare details. I have not read the book on ahead. For anybody who's new to Middlemarch Meditations, we really are going through this book, for me, the very first time. So each close reading is the first time I have looked at the text. But I know enough from having read other resources about Middlemarch to get information for these meditations. Inevitably, I see spoilers. And so I'm thinking, this little tale I feel it will have implications, and I'm hoping I can remember it so we can hark back to it in later chapters. But what we also need to do before we begin the chapter is just note that the epigraph itself, the 3 lines there, focus on lines 50 to 52 and only part of those lines. So effectively, the lines that Eliot is quoting at the head of this chapter are, "Her manner of speaking was also very womanly and plain. No pretentious terms had she to seem wise." In other words, what's focusing on here is not the tale as a whole, although I like to give you the tale as a whole for context, but it's focusing on this fact that the woman being described in the physician's tale did not have any pretentiousness or anything in her speech that wasn't open and transparent and honest. Now let's get into the chapter. It was in that way Dorothea came to be sobbing as soon as she was securely alone. But she was presently roused by a knock at the door, which made her hastily dry her eyes before saying, "Come in." Tantripp had brought a card and said that there was a gentleman waiting in the lobby. The courier had told him that only Mrs. Casaubon was at home, but he said he was a relation of Mr. Casaubon's. Would she see him? "Yes," said Dorothea without pause. "Show him into the salon." Her chief impressions about young Ladislaw were that when she had seen him at Lowick, she had been made aware of Mr. Casaubon's generosity towards him, and also that she had been interested in his own hesitation about his career. She was alive to anything that gave her an opportunity for active sympathy, and at this moment it seemed as if the visit had come to shake her out of her self-absorbed discontent, to remind her of her husband's goodness, and make her feel that she had now the right to be his helpmate in all kind deeds. She waited a minute or two, but when she passed into the next room, there were just signs enough that she had been crying to make her open face look more youthful and appealing than usual. She met Ladislaw with that exquisite smile of goodwill which is unmixed with vanity, and held out her hand to him. He was the elder by several years, but at that moment he looked much the younger, for his transparent complexion flushed suddenly, and he spoke with a shyness extremely unlike the ready indifference of his manner with his male companion, while Dorothea became all the calmer, with a wondering desire to put him at ease. "I was not aware that you and Mr. Casaubon were in Rome until this morning, when I saw you in the Vatican Museum," he said. I knew you at once, but I mean that I concluded Mr. Casaubon's address would be found at the poste restante, and I was anxious to pay my respects to him and to you as early as possible. Pray sit down. He is not here now, but he will be glad to hear of you, I'm sure," said Dorothea, seating herself unthinkingly between the fire and the light of the tall window, and pointing to a chair opposite with the quietude of a benignant matron. The signs of girlish sorrow in her face were only the more striking. "Mr. Casaubon is much engaged, but you will leave your address, will you not? And he will write to you." "You are very good," said Ladislaw, beginning to lose his diffidence in the interest with which he was observing the signs of weeping, which had altered her face. "My address is on my card, but if you will allow me, I will call again tomorrow at an hour when Mr. Casaubon is likely to be at home. He goes to read in the library of the Vatican every day, and you can hardly see him except by an appointment, especially now. We are about to leave Rome, and he is very busy. He is usually away almost from breakfast till dinner, but I am sure he will wish you to dine with us." Will Ladislaw was struck mute for a few moments. He had never been fond of Mr. Casaubon, and if it had not been for the sense of obligation, would have laughed at him as a bat of erudition. But the idea of this dried-up pedant, this elaborator of small explanations about as important as the surplus stock of false antiquities kept in a vendor's back chamber, having first got this adorable young creature to marry him, and then passing his honeymoon away from her, groping after his mouldy futilities, Will was given to hyperbole, this sudden picture stirred him with a sort of comic disgust. He was divided between the impulse to laugh aloud and the equally unseasonable impulse to burst into scornful invective. For an instant, he felt that the struggle was causing a queer contortion of his mobile features, but with a good effort, he resolved it into nothing more offensive than a merry smile. Dorothea wondered, but the smile was irresistible, and shone back from her face, too. Will Ladislaw's smile was delightful unless you were angry with him beforehand. It was a gush of inward light, illuminating the transparent skin as well as the eyes, and playing about every curve and line as if some Ariel were touching them with a new charm, and banishing forever the traces of moodiness. The reflection of that smile could not but have a little merriment in it too, even under dark eyelashes still moist, as Dorothea said, inquiringly, "Something amuses you?" "Yes," said Will, quick in finding resources. "I am thinking of the sort of figure I cut the first time I saw you, when you annihilated my poor sketch with your criticism." "My criticism?" said Dorothea, wondering still more. "Surely not. I always feel particularly ignorant about painting. I suspected you of knowing so much that you knew how to say just what was most cutting. You said, I dare say you don't remember it as I do, that the relation of my sketch to nature was quite hidden from you. Or at least you implied that." Will could laugh now as well as smile. "That was really my ignorance," said Dorothea, admiring Will's good humor. "I must have said so only because I never could see any beauty in the pictures which my uncle told me all judges thought very fine, and I have gone about with just the same ignorance in Rome. There are comparatively few paintings that I can really enjoy. At first, when I enter a room where the walls are covered with frescoes or with rare pictures, I feel a kind of awe, like a child present at great ceremonies where there are grand robes and processions. I feel myself in the presence of some higher life than my own. But when I begin to examine the pictures one by one, the life goes out of them, or else is something violent and strange to me. It must be my own dullness. I am seeing so much all at once, and not understanding half of it. That always makes one feel stupid. It is painful to be told that anything is very fine, and not being able to feel that it is fine. Something like being blind while people talk of the sky. Oh, there is a great deal in the feeling for art which must be acquired, said Will. It was impossible now to doubt the directness of Dorothea's confession. Art is an old language with a great many artificial, affected styles, and sometimes the chief pleasure one gets out of knowing them is the mere sense of knowing. I enjoy the art of all sorts here immensely, but I suppose if I could pick my enjoyment to pieces, I should find it made up of many different threads. There is something in daubing a little oneself and having an idea of the process. You mean perhaps to be a painter, said Dorothea with a new direction of interest. You mean to make painting your profession? Mr. Casaubon will like to hear that you have chosen a profession. No, oh no, said Will, with some coldness. I have quite made up my mind against it. It is too one-sided a life. I have been seeing a great deal of the German artists here. I travelled from Frankfurt with one of them. Some are fine, even brilliant fellows, but I should not like to get into their way of looking at the world entirely from the studio point of view. Oh, that I can understand, said Dorothea cordially, and in Rome it seems as if there were so many things which are more wanted in the world than pictures. But if you have a genius for painting, would it not be right to take that as a guide? Perhaps you might do better things than these, or different, so that there may not be so many pictures almost all alike in the same place. There was no mistaking this simplicity, and Will was won by it into frankness. A man must have a very rare genius to make changes of that sort. I am afraid mine would not carry me even to the pitch of doing well what has been done already, or at least not so well as to make it worthwhile, and I should never succeed in anything by dint of drudgery. If things don't come easily to me, I never get them. I have heard Mr. Casaubon say that he regrets your want of patience, said Dorothea gently. She was rather shocked at this mode of taking all life as a holiday. Yes, I know Mr. Casaubon's opinion. He and I differ. Right, that was the extent of the reading. Now we're going to start pulling things apart, going back to page 204 where the chapter started, and that phrase, Tantrip had brought a card. Some of you who read a lot of 19th century literature, or you're interested in that period of history, you're going to go, oh yes, I know what that is. So I'm explaining now. I'm going to bore the people that know and enlighten the people that don't know. This was a calling card, and there was an elaborate social etiquette in the 19th century, in the upper classes and the aspiring middle classes, of course, always in the aspiring middle classes, to regulate human interaction so that you avoided confrontation or any kind of uncomfortable social scene in front of witnesses. You don't want that. So everyone carried a supply of cards printed with their name. Some had more information than that. Some had an address. And I understand that in the United States, during the 19th century, some of the cards became quite colorful and creative. In England, they remained very straightforward, always a cream card with black printing for the most part. And everyone had to have these cards to use as tools for initiating face-to-face social contact. So Ladislaw was following these rules, absolutely. He gave his card to the servant who answered the door. He did not come inside the house proper. He was waiting in the lobby, of course. So this is a building full of apartments. He waits in the lobby, which is a public space. And he would ask to call on the master of the house, absolutely. Unless he was personally acquainted with the lady of the house, he could not ask to call on her. So he asked to call on the master of the house. The servant advised him the master is not in, and then Ladislaw tries to think of a way to make the call happen, and he says, well, he is a relative. Now, that is different. If you are family, calling makes things a little bit different. So now the servant is in a situation where they need to consult with the only person in the house, and that's Dorothea. They go upstairs. They say to Dorothea, here's what happened in the lobby. do you wish to see him? Because, of course, Dorothea was perfectly within her rights, relation or not, to refuse to see him because he is a man on his own and she is a woman on her own. Despite servants in the house, she does not need to see anyone she doesn't want to see, but in particular, a man that she might have to meet with alone. But she does agree because the calling card is shown to her, so she knows that it is Will. And she remembers him and thinks, no, this will be fine, so we will go ahead and meet. So she chooses to see him, partly because her little thought process that she had there on page 204, she thinks this is an opportunity to do something kind for her husband by agreeing to see a relation who has called on them, because Mr. Casaubon himself is so busy, he doesn't have time to pay social calls. And as part of her thought process, as she's deciding whether or not she will see him, she talks about her own interest in Will Ladislaw's hesitation about choosing a career. And it struck me when I was reading that, how odd, what a novelty it must have been for upper class women in that time. You know, this business of having to choose a profession. It would be a process they would not understand much at all, not when they were young. For every woman, everything was decided. You married, you should try to marry, and then you became a mother and you administered the house. It was so simple. You didn't choose anything, except possibly, if you were fortunate, you might get to choose your husband. But that was about it. If you did not marry, for whatever reason, you became the default carer for any elderly relation. So the idea of choosing, it must have fascinated Dorothea. And she herself, if she'd been born a boy instead of a girl, I just wonder, what would she have chosen as a career? I think the church would have been an acceptable choice, absolutely. And it just seems like that would go with her temperament and her interests. So, and of course, it would be the perfect excuse for a university education, because clergymen, especially in higher ranks, needed to have had an education at Oxford or Cambridge. She could have done that. And I imagine she must find it strange that Will hesitates and isn't sure, because I think she would have been quite sure had she been born a boy. But the most joyous thing on page 204 is Will's reaction when he sees her. He can tell that she's been crying just in spite the minute or two that she waited, having dried her eyes for her face to kind of recover itself. There were still some signs, and he immediately becomes very shy, almost a little starstruck, which is strange. And his complexion flushes, and he doesn't quite, he trips over his words a little bit, and we see on the top of page 205. So there is something about Dorothea. I mean, this is how many men now have been attracted to her. We think of Rosamund Vincy as being the woman who turns heads so automatically, but so is Dorothea Brooke. There, you know, we think Sir James has already been attracted to her, Mr. Casaubon, of all things, and then we've got now Will Ladislaw. So that's 3 men in the course of the book so far who have found themselves powerfully drawn to her. And Naumann, of course. Now, Naumann only wanted to paint her, but perhaps if she hadn't been a married woman related to Will Ladislaw, perhaps he would have wondered if that could have gone further. But it's clear that there's something striking about her appearance as well as her manner. And I just think it's interesting that she's just as much of a magnet for men as Rosamund Vincy. And when we come to page 205, we have a term that needs to be translated or explained, post-restant. It's a French term. Its first English usage was in 1768, and that was coinciding with a period when upper-class English men and some women would embark on a long trip around Europe, in their youth usually, lasting several months, as a cultural experience to give them something to talk about later at parties. This was called the Grand Tour. In order to receive any mail that was sent to you while you were abiding at a number of different places, different cities, for any traveler who did not have a permanent address, they could register for the poste restante in the city that they were staying in and receive post to that office. And it seems that you could also locate people this way because there was not the same data security measures that we would now, that would never happen now. But Ladislaw must have gone from the museum to the Poste Restante in Rome and inquired to get the address of Mr. Casaubon, where he was staying. And I love my favorite phrase here as Will is stumbling into the introduction of himself is, I knew you at once. And then there's a dash and he immediately goes, I mean, like, oh my goodness, what am I saying? Because only a little while earlier when Naumann was like, oh, you know her? And Ladislaw was like, oh, I've only seen her once, for a couple of minutes. And I thought, so he can't really say to Dorothea, if that's true, oh, I knew it was you immediately, because that suggests some kind of fixation with Dorothea that he has, but he shouldn't admit to having, in short. And when Dorothea tells him that basically Mr. Casaubon is never in, he is spending all day, every day, at the Vatican Library, and Will's reaction, which is like he's just stunned. He's stunned to silence. Of course, can you imagine? He's like, so this old man that I have never admired, I don't like the way he goes about his life at all. Not only has he managed somehow to convince this beautiful young thing to marry him, but then on his honeymoon, he's spending every single day, all day, away from her. And Will, he doesn't know what to do with all that information, as you can see. And he comes up with this lovely insult for Mr. Casaubon. He calls him the bat of erudition. By bat, I don't think he's referring to, that implement that you use in baseball or cricket to hit a ball. I think he's referring to the mammal, the nocturnal little mammal with wings that flies about at night and cannot see the way we can see, but it relies on sonar echoes to locate things in its surroundings. And so I think his portrayal of Mr. Casaubon is, here's this creature that spends all his time in the dark, in more ways than one, and completely unseeing of what is really out there in the world around him, or even understanding and perceiving the world around him correctly, because anybody would be shocked by this kind of behavior directly after you've married your wife. It's like, for a little while, you should be kind of obsessed with your wife. That's how it's supposed to be. Amazingly, probably the only man on the planet who has, well, no, not truly, because I'm sure there are stories that you will now tell me in the comments. No, I know another marriage that was quite interesting also. If you have little stories like that and you want to share them, that'd be cool, without naming names, okay? But I just love how utterly shocked he is that this is what is going on. And I notice that on page 205 and 206, Eliot twice uses the word transparent to describe Will's complexion. Now, obviously, that cannot mean literally. It's a metaphor of there's something about Will's face that lets his character and his personality show. He can't really hide that well. And that goes along with Dorothea's. In effect, they're kind of very alike in that way. She speaks and is open, and you get what you get. She doesn't hide a great deal, although she is hiding a great deal from her husband. That is telling. But she does not hide anything if she can help it. And so Will is getting her honest self, and he seems to be giving back his honest self. And you can just see that what's beginning is a relationship on a much better footing than Dorothea's with Mr. Casaubon. And as we go on to page 206, at the top of the page, as I was reading, I sighed because it mentioned, of course, Ariel, saying as if some Ariel were touching them with a new charm, that is, touching Dorothea's features. I think they were talking about Dorothea's features. They could have been talking about Will's. I did get a little bit mixed up, and perhaps we should go back and just reread that paragraph and make sure. So we'll start at the bottom of page 205, where it says, Dorothea wondered, but the smile was irresistible. In other words, Will's smile was irresistible to her, and shone back from her face too. In other words, they both spontaneously smiled in reaction to each other. Will Ladislaw's smile was delightful, unless you were angry with him beforehand. Okay, so we're still talking about Will. It was a gush of inward light illuminating the transparent skin as well as the eyes. So the transparency is being attributed to skin and eyes. So everything about Will is transmitting himself honestly. And then it goes on to say, and playing about every curve and line as if some Ariel were touching them with a new charm. Okay, we've established that now. It's Dorothea's view of Will Ladislaw's face that is being talked about. Ariel, for those of you who know, you'll be bored again, because I need to just do a little explaining for anyone who's not highly familiar with Shakespeare, or you're familiar with certain plays and not with others. I mean, I'm the same. But as it happens, The Tempest by William Shakespeare is my favorite play of his. And so Ariel is a character in that play. I'll give you a quick plot synopsis, okay? It was the last play that Shakespeare wrote in his life. And it's been said that you can read the play with the idea that Shakespeare is personifying himself as a creative person through the principal character of the play, whose name is Prospero. Prospero is an old man. He was the Duke of Milan, yes, and he's also a practicing sorcerer. He doesn't say that, but it's clear he knows how to do magic. Prospero can capture and command the obedience of any spirit entities that are around. And Ariel is one of those entities who is serving him throughout the play. And if you know the play, you will probably have an aha moment at this point and admire George Eliot for bringing in the reference to Ariel here. And let me give you all this aha moment. In Act 1, Scene 2 of The Tempest, Prospero, with the help of Ariel, brings together his daughter Miranda and the shipwrecked son of the King of Naples, whose name is Ferdinand. Both Ariel and his master, as these two young people are coming together, they are using their spells and their magic to cause them both to instantly fall in love with each other. And here we have this meeting between Ladislaw and Dorothea, and aha, Ariel is present. Now, who is our Prospero? George Eliot herself. So, well done, I say. That's very well done. So these two are charmed by each other, but Will, of course, he's trying to get over his shock reaction to the marriage of Mr. and Mrs. Casaubon and what it is like at its honeymoon phase, which sounds horrible. And he cannot, when Dorothy asks if something is amusing him, he cannot be honest yet. It isn't good manners. So he's quick in finding resources, the text says. We all wish that there existed the kind of magic that would instantly give Dorothea the same understanding that Ladislaw has about Mr. Casaubon. That would help her so much. Or perhaps it wouldn't, I don't know. To have all the knowledge that Will has of Mr. Casaubon might be really painful for her. But he doesn't burden her with his true feelings. He talks around and cleverly he goes back to their one and only conversation and makes it into something that allows them to reveal more about each other to each other. And how helpful this is for Dorothea. We've noticed in previous chapters she's talked about how Rome overwhelms her and she doesn't know what to do with all her reactions and feelings, or sometimes her lack of reaction and feeling, because she just is overwhelmed and she has no one to confess this to. She doesn't feel she can confess it to her husband. He doesn't seem to want to do intimacy and talking about feelings or anything else that seems intimate. And so for the first time since she has come to Rome, Dorothy is able to just spill out how strange this city feels to her, how she doesn't feel at home. She doesn't know what to make of all the art that she's being taken to see. And yet she wants to understand. She wishes someone would help her to have eyes. I guess that's the best phrase. Someone help her to have eyes that can see what is all this about. And Will begins a process which he could continue if he wanted, beginning to explain to her. It's a process of learning. You don't look at all art at once and immediately go, I get it. You have to spend time and learn about the techniques. And then you begin to realize, once you know, which things are truly worth spending time with and which may be less so. And in all this talking, one thing he mentions is what would probably help your understanding of art is if you did a little painting yourself, and implying that that's what has helped him. And then Dorothea latches on to that because She's ever the dutiful wife, isn't she? And the purpose of this visit, she agreed to this visit because she wanted to do something kind for Mr. Casaubon. So she lets herself become a mouthpiece for Mr. Casaubon. That's unfortunate, but she does. If you want, if you've got your book with you, and you'll see Mr. Casaubon discussing his concerns about Ladislaw, how he hasn't made up his mind what profession to pursue, and he wants more time to travel. And if you want to, let's look back and see what Dorothea's response was when she heard what Mr. Casaubon said about Ladislaw then. So Mr. Casaubon said, "Yes, I have agreed to furnish him, that is Ladislaw, with moderate supplies for a year or so. He asks no more. I shall let him be tried by the test of freedom." And Dorothea says, "That is very kind of you," said Dorothea, looking up at Mr. Casaubon with delight. There we go. Remember, there was delight at one time. "It is noble. After all, people may really have in them some vocation which is not quite plain to themselves. May they not? They may seem idle and weak because they are growing. We should be very patient with each other, I think." That was her response back then to her husband's voiced anxieties. And now she feels like she should step in and nudge Will. That's a mistake. His tone changes as soon as she becomes more like Mr. Casaubon than like herself. And there's almost a conflict that opens up between them. Not quite, because the two of them are too entranced by each other. But as Dorothea keeps sort of, "Oh, but maybe you could try this, or maybe this," Will makes comments that shock her. She just doesn't know how to take them. And in particular, the one where he says, "And I should never succeed in anything by dint of drudgery. If things don't come easily to me, I never get them." And she thinks, "I beg your pardon." And this is the difference, of course, between her as a woman when you don't have a choice of vocation. So if you don't have a choice of vocation, then the only thing you should be doing with your life is getting on and preparing for that. So drudgery, if that's what you get, then you do it, and you learn how to do it perhaps more efficiently, but that's the best you can hope for. So for Will to sit here and say something odd, like, "If things don't come easily to me, I never get them." No woman had such a luxury. If motherhood didn't come easily, if being a wife didn't come easily, if staying at home all the time, tough. So Dorothy is just, she doesn't quite know how to take this sentiment as Will says it. And I imagine nobody's really surprised at that, are they? Dorothea does her duty. That's who she is. This is a complete rabbit hole now. It's not really about Middlemarch. My initial gut reaction was to side with Dorothea myself a little bit. I suppose we've all been well drilled and well conditioned. I came from a Protestant background going back generations, so you can just imagine that I would never have been allowed to believe in such a thing as, if things don't come easily to you, then just toss them. It's like, no. So yeah, I was a little bit on Dorothea's side, and yet I don't know Ladislaw well, and so maybe he's just being lazy, but when you use a word like drudgery to describe work, we don't say drudgery about all kinds of work, do we? Not if there's work that we love and work that we make ourselves do. And I would not call writing Middlemarch meditation scripts drudgery. They are work, but they're not drudgery. So what is a good working definition of drudgery? And is it the kind of work perhaps which it wastes your ability? It doesn't really use your natural abilities. The kind of work that you wish had been automated, for example. I wish all housework could be done by a robot, because that would free up so much more of my time to do something that I'm better able to do. I like to cook, though. And you see, if somebody hated cooking, they'd call that drudgery, wouldn't they? And they'd wish that could be automated. They'd want a cooking robot, wouldn't they? Whereas I don't want a cooking robot, but I would like a vacuuming robot and a clean the bathroom robot and a garden yard work robot, and then just to take rubbish to the recycling center. I'd like it to go shopping for me as well. I don't really like grocery shopping. So if there was a grocery shopping robot, yeah, all of that would be fantastic. So I think it's a question of work is drudgery when you're doing it feeling that you must, not being driven by your own love for the activity itself. But there's so much nuance to this business of work, isn't there? And success and failure as well. When Will Ladislaw talks about painting, he says he realizes that the amount of talent he has isn't the amount that's going to make a big conceptual impact. It's not going to change the way people do art when they see Will Ladislaw's art. He says he has just enough talent to be perhaps as good as, to imitate the kinds of art that already are out there. Now, many artists died in poverty, and that wasn't because they didn't work hard at what they did. It's just that work can be so different in terms of how rewarding it can be to yourself versus how much the world values it and is willing to pay you for it. It's such a big deal. And I keep thinking of back when I was at Open University, in my early course, which was kind of a survey, we met lots of other students, and I met a man who had retired from being an architect. Now, for most of his career, he worked with pencil and ruler and on a drawing board, and all his concepts and designs were made by hand. And he was very successful at his career. But as he got toward the last few years, of course, the job began to digitize. People began to use computer programming to create most of the architectural drawings. And he had had absolutely no exposure to computers as part of his job. It wasn't necessary. He didn't need it. All he needed was his drawing board and his skill there. And so it was weird, his own job that he had been fantastic at and successful in for most of his life, as he reached the last few years, he found himself becoming less successful because he didn't have a grasp of the digital skills now that were needed to be an architect going forward. And so he took the decision to retire, which was probably good, although he struggled with Open University. He wanted to study art history, of course. He loves to draw. He loved art. But he struggled so much with the digital requirements of learning at a distance. He didn't know how to read a website, how to navigate through it. He didn't really understand how to download documents or how to follow links through to other locations. All these things were a complete mystery to him. And yet he was very successful in the job as it was that truly fulfilled met all his needs and was not drudgery to him. But once the digital element came in, he found that more of a drudgery, and it changed the very job that he used to be very good at. But that was a complete digression and rabbit hole. But I thought it was interesting because maybe that's what Will is trying to say. I am looking for the kind of work that it will never be drudgery. It may be hard and it may be work, but it will never feel like drudgery because I will just love it. And therefore it's going to feel different than other kinds of work do. And that's the end of our meditation today. I thought I would cut it there. I know that's only a bare 4 pages, but I just feel that conceptually where the chapter goes next, it just seemed like its own kind of section. I also felt that where it's going to go next, we will have deeper rabbit holes. So I just thought, if I go further now, this meditation is going to go on a little too long. So that's it, everybody. I hope you're doing well in your October reading. I haven't really had a chance to say much about what I've been reading in October. I'm still catching up with all the books I read in September. But what we're going to do midweek, because I can, is a tag, and that's just going to buy me a little time to finish a couple of scripts and do a little bit of extra filming so that I can catch you up on my September reading next weekend. Okay, everybody. So I hope you're doing well and look forward to seeing you in a few days' time. Take care. Bye-bye.